So hello, and welcome to this presentation on taking a deep dive into LIMS software evaluation. So my name is Bernie Lee. I'm a product manager here at LabQ Software for our biologics LIMS. Today I'll present some guidance about preparing for and evaluating LIMS products to help you navigate this potentially complex process. These are important lessons that have been learned from 20 years of institutional experience solving data management problems for a wide variety of research organizations. Prospects come to us in a variety of states of both organization and preparedness. We get aligned and help them implement from those states. And of course, we try to stay immersed in the industry, committed to the advancement of science and technology. So I hope that you leave here today with a clearer path to the solutions you seek. And I would also really appreciate learning something from you. And so as we progress through this, I have a couple of polls I'll invite you to respond to. Please also submit any questions through the Q&A as they arise. And I will make time for as many of them as are asked at the end. Thank you. So here's your buyer's guide. It's gonna sound really simple at first, but as with nearly everything in science and technology, easier said than done. So let's walk through these quickly and we'll dive in. And I'll note throughout this presentation, we're gonna come back to this list regularly, so you'll see it repeatedly. So really quick, first is know thyself. What are the problems and inefficiencies that you want to solve? Identify your challenges, your pain points. Second, prepare yourself to interact with vendors and their products, armed with the knowledge of how to make important decisions. And third, know the products and companies you'll be investigating and screen the vast cornucopia of available options. Fourth, dive deeply into the top candidates, get a feel for what working with them will be like with all their trade-offs. Fifth, make sure you like the company, the people, the process. You're considering a very long-term commitment here. And sixth, make your decision, align with current and future needs. See, easy as can be. Let's get on the same page about what sorts of problems a LIMS may be able to solve, and then we'll dive into this list. So why might you need a LIMS? These are some challenges, pain points, problems you might have, and how they may ultimately translate into a defined set of requirements. Now, I've categorized a few of these, but this is obviously very, very far from exhaustive. You'll come up with a variety of general issues and specific problems that might populate your list. But let's start with efficiency, which is really, really an important category since scientists are basically always going to find a way to accomplish their objective. It can just be much slower, more painful, and more expensive than is desired. So this category includes things like too much time spent managing data instead of driving research, and the need to move away from manual processes that are perhaps error-prone or slow, as well as the use of many disparate systems becoming inefficient and unmanageable, especially for newer colleagues that have to learn it all, keep it straight. Then there's specific data management, analysis, and maybe even reporting practices, which may include difficulty tracking data that you need for planning, for decision making, for things like regulatory submissions, and the like. People often have challenges managing samples and connecting them to results as that data is generated, and certainly an excess of effort generating views, reports, and analyses, either for immediate decision making or later on. You'll find a lot of workflow and collaboration problems when you explore your own organizations. Often the siloing of data slows cross-functional and post-hoc use. You can think of bioinformatics applications, as well as inconsistent data practices between individuals, between teams, causing some of the same kinds of problems. Pardon me. Okay, security. I'm going to spend a little more time on this later, but I'll just say for now that without a system in place, you are effectively reliant on individual responsibility and ingenuity to protect and control access to your IP. And with the right people, no problem. But especially as you scale, this becomes a big problem. In fact, all of these problems get worse as you scale, which essentially means that the more successful you are, the more you grow, the harder your work life can become. And it's really important to get a system in place that can help with this kind of stuff before you get bogged down. So how do these things translate? Given these and many other possible problems, how can a LIMS ameliorate them to the benefit of your teams? So they can increase efficiency and predictability of regular work. One of the major ways in which this is true is by reducing spreadsheet work and tracking. The bonus here is fewer errors, greater consistency, improved findability, which I'll touch on a little bit more later as well. It's also a big deal for everyone to know the single centralized source of truth for data, because the amount of time that I have heard people spend digging data and files out of various systems and places for themselves and for each other can be pretty appalling, impressive. The purpose of a LIMS, though, is really for data management. They help keep track of data in such a way that finding it in the right context is a whole lot easier. For example, tracing samples and other materials to find out whether you have anything that meets particular criteria for a new project. LIMS will feed you useful views of your data for all kinds of purposes, including things like local scientific operations. As one scientist or a small group of scientists working through these operations, it will help you with the steps. Aggregation of experiments, project level team decision making, management or executive review of things, as well as regulatory affairs compilations. A good LIMS is going to provide programmatic utility for your bioinformaticians, data scientists, or whatever other name these wizards go by at your institution. And they want structured data for their additional analyses or to feed their various models, machine learning, AI, stuff like that. On the workflow and collaboration side, LIMS can really help smooth interactions between scientists, as well as between teams and organizations. With users across different teams, the natural siloing of data is lessened. Data needed for cross-functional decisions, handoffs, are organized and made available when appropriate. And data operations, as I've said, are centralized. They're standardized, and they can even be automated in a lot of cases. These things bring great predictability, visibility, and accountability. And there are lots of security considerations with external applications. Again, I'll touch on a few more later, but a modern LIMS will be constructed with a security-first engineering approach. It'll provide comprehensive security, including granular permissions, to empower you to decide who sees and does what, and of course includes protections from external access. Okay, so now we understand some of the benefits of the LIMS, some of the problems you might have. Let's turn towards formulating your particulars. Given the variation at different institutions, what is a useful framework for answering the question, what data problems do you need to solve, in a way that will help you evaluate and select the right tools? So the first question is who? Whose problems are you trying to solve? Who is it going to affect when you make changes? Is it just the scientists and their ability to be organized and efficient? That would be a perfectly good answer. Or is it much broader than that, potentially including those data scientists, regulatory affairs people, management or executives, and others? And furthermore, do you have representatives from those affected groups that can help lead this effort, help make a decision? You might be surprised by just how many people have pain points around their data. Then what are the scientific functions being served? You are scientists. But this obviously overlaps with the question of who, but it's a valuable distinction to make. Is it all the scientific data operations, or do you have clear major bottlenecks, say near the front of your pipeline, for example, So perhaps you just want to focus on discovery and cell line development or something like that. Have you considered the functions that you outsource? As in, right now you send information off to some other vendor, they send you information and materials back. Is the data for that outsourced work just sitting in a set of files somewhere, mostly unknown and not terribly useful? How can you take advantage of that? For the people and scientific functions you're considering, what are the biggest problems to be solved and what are the easiest to be solved? Those can be very different. And can these lists be prioritized? So a few common examples. Data governance and consolidation. Do you have one centralized place to capture and find data? Or, as I asked before, do you have to spend time tracking this stuff down all over the place every time somebody needs it? Just connecting and integrating data. So with each step, do you have to spend time transforming, copying, pasting data from one result file into some other file or multiple, so that you can actually get to the point where you can analyze that data and make some decision? Let's say you're working through a campaign that involves a lot of sample processing in plates and some kind of screening, maybe high throughput screening. When you go and you look at all of those spreadsheets, how many tabs are on that thing? How many macros are there on the spreadsheet that you need in order to consolidate that data? That, of course, is a perfect example of the next point on here, which is about the inefficiencies and error-prone nature of those spreadsheets. And then there's facilitating handoffs and requests. Are you sending files back and forth, including requests for data and materials? Things get lost, inboxes get filled up, your emails get filtered to spam. And this last one is very big these days. Is your data in a structured form and in a place where your data scientists can access it and make use of it easily for advanced analytics and to feed their various models? I assure you, they do not enjoy the big red barn full of files approach to organizing data. A quick but important note on this slide: getting these questions answered indirectly defines your success and selection criteria for a product. It also helps you implement that product after choosing it by helping you stay focused on the key solutions that you set out in advance to solve, instead of trying to solve everyone's problems up front. We don't want to try to boil the ocean. We want to be targeted. Okay. Here's the first poll, my first chance to take a quick breath. You are here because you enjoy my storytelling, or you're thinking about getting data management help through LIMS or similar. What are the challenges that you have that a LIMS might be able to solve? If there's some consistency among these answers, and I'm not counting on that, I'll try to spend a little more time in those areas. So do me a favor and please vote through the Zoom poll feature. Thanks. Okay, while you're finishing that up, the next round of preparation will begin to turn us outward, enabling the research of an initial set of products and preparing what vendors will need to help you. So there are some other things that you will need for your evaluation. We can debate later which of these is most important, but I propose the first point as a likely contender. On what basis will you be choosing a product? What are your selection criteria based on the requirements gathering that you've done? If you can't define what you want, you probably won't get it. You also can't do this in a vacuum. Institutional leadership at the appropriate level needs to be on board and aware of the motivation for the search. What are the facets of this that they care about? And also, what budget and other resources are they making available for you? If there is no money or people to help implement, this is probably not worth your time to explore. First plug for security, do not wait until the end of your search to involve your IT and security professionals. If they exist at your organization, consult them early. Sometimes they have hard requirements, and always they should be kept informed of a potential implementation like this. You may also learn that other teams at your organization have solutions in place already that you can adopt or learn from. Or you may discover that your institution has a set of preferred vendors, which is probably where you should start your search. And likely related to that institutional leadership, you should determine who and how a decision will be made and disseminated to everyone else, as well as when you're trying to make those decisions. Your preparation does not end there, however. When it's time to dive more deeply into one or a couple of top candidates, you will need to provide the vendors with a variety of pieces of information to help them show you what you need to see. So those will include real-world example data, defined processes that you want supported, who and how many people will be using the potential system, as well as how flexible or adaptable the people as well as the processes are to change. The biggest pain points that need to be addressed, as well as what the future looks like to the best of your ability to forecast. Okay, so it's actually time to start looking at products, vendors, and services, comparing functionality and trade-offs. So now that you have a framework, a system in place for defining and articulating what will be the most useful to you, it's time for a new set of challenges. The way you think about and talk about what you do may not perfectly match how vendors describe what they offer. Very frustrating. For reasons good and bad, vendors will often use generalities, functional categories, and keywords. How will what you have prepared translate onto the way LIMS vendors categorize functions in their products? The goal here is to bring together the science and business minds you possess with the software and marketing minds on the other side. So here are some common categories of LIMS functionality. Again, there are surely more that you will run into, but by breaking down this set, it will help you interpret something unfamiliar when you see it. So first up here is sample management, which is more than just freezer management. These are the functions that help you track what has happened to some material. It's the lineage and relationships to other samples and the results generated from it. These next 3 points are examples that I hope will kind of paint a picture of what I'm talking about, what I'm implying. So imagine I'm going to take kind of a antibody research or large molecule research approach to this. Imagine that you want to manage some glycerol stocks and plates through iterative antibody screening and characterization workflows. What material is in the 3rd or 4th generation plate set? Through 3rd or 4th iteration, where was it on the last plate set? Once I do my analysis and selection, how do I find the original sequence or clone that was in a different location on a previous plate? These sorts of unfun questions are functions of sample management. Aligned with that example, I want to capture sample and plate well metadata for inclusion with results and analyses. As I'm progressing through these iterations, these screening and characterization rounds, how do I keep track of that information well? How do I do that properly? And then after the fact, after I have gone through one or several of these rounds, these campaigns, I might want to explore what materials I have that meet criteria for new projects. Do I have, for example, any antibodies that bind to a particular target that I could use as a start point for a new project? Do I have any that use, 2 particular vectors? If so, where are they? How much of it do I have? What's the status of that material? All important sample management category questions that a LIMS should be able to help you answer. Data management. Okay, so data management more broadly. Here's where these days you'll hear a lot of talk about FAIR principles. That's a system that makes sure the data it manages is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. This is, of course, a really good start point. Practically, this means, among other things, having structured, standardized, connected, or integrated data that's easy to find and track. That structure, that expectation for your data, is enforced to some degree. When you are consistent, however, the system can do a lot of work for you, like automatically integrating results with sample information, presenting QC views, presenting analyses, generating routine reports. It can replace a lot of the spreadsheet macros as well as manual work that you do by, say, capturing that plate-based data for tracking and alignment with other information. Really speeds things up and allows for some automated processing. Okay, workflow and collaboration can mean quite a variety of things. I've chosen a few here, again, to paint a picture. Many products allow you to configure a set of steps in a process or in your various processes, and then to work through them, usually providing assistance kind of along the way. This enables standardization and management of these workflows. It also provides visibility into progress, so there can be improved monitoring and accountability. Often, multiple people or teams are involved in these workflows, and so handoffs of critical information, as well as notifications for when things are done or needed, when it's your turn, are provided. And the purpose of, say, documenting what is being done is, of course, for things like reproducibility, awareness, learning, and communication. And therefore, many LIMS will offer either ELN functionality or other annotation functionality that will help explain happenings in the system and highlight important information. And as I mentioned in the last slide about data management, a lot of these things, it's often for others that we generate analyses and reports, not just for ourselves. Okay, speaking of analyses, LIMS often facilitate this. They have some degree of built-in capabilities, like calculations, plotting, graphing of various kinds, data sorting and filtering, and very often they can also package up your data since it's structured for use in other analytics applications when you prefer them. This should work for individual units of data, like a single assay run, a single plate, or looking across multiple runs for quality tracking or cross-functional decision-making, things like that. It also sometimes comes in specialized analyses. So some LIMS will be oriented towards a specific kind of endeavor, and the analyses will match what is commonly needed there. So our biologics LIMS, for example, is oriented around large molecule development, and it therefore includes a lot of things about sequences, molecules, protein batches, and the like. And so we automatically calculate various critical physical properties needed for analyses and present views of data that are scoped to the different kinds of decisions that have to be made throughout a campaign. And security. Security risks are present in all software tools, and it's certainly important that you understand these and that you feel confident in your vendor and the products that you use. We obviously use software anyway, despite the risks, but we want to mitigate those. So again, you might have strongly established institutional policies in regard to security, which can make your selection process easier or much harder. It kind of depends. Some institutions require that software be on their infrastructure, but plenty don't. There are a lot of vendors out there that exclusively offer software as a service, in their cloud environment, their infrastructure. It's really good to know your rules and to understand the trade-offs of letting vendors provide versus supporting these things yourself. Quick pro tip here. As I mentioned before, quality vendors must emphasize security in their software development practices. or very quickly trust in them would be lost. You can ask vendors about their approaches, but to be perfectly honest, most are quite good at this. Let them do your security work for you if you can. Use their secure infrastructure if you can. There are, however, nuances within cloud infrastructures that might be worth exploring. Things like multi-tenant architectures versus private cloud environments, as well as perhaps more mundane things like what country the hardware that these things ultimately are situated in is, what time zone, things like that. Then there's the front door to these systems. There are many methods for authentication. The way you sign in and are identified in the system. Many requirements may exist in this space, including things like the need to support two-factor authentication and single sign-on technologies, as well as many others. Within the applications, there may be various ways of organizing and partitioning data. Typically, these come with access control for layers of the data in the form of permissions and roles. And those things may have different names amongst different vendors. Who has control of these settings and how it works is certainly worth exploring. Relatedly, you may need the ability to lock down data, lock down notebooks and other data. This certainly falls under security and is often needed because of the next point on here, which is the need to comply with various federal, institutional, or other regulations that may dictate some of your choices here. You might need some kind of GXP compliance, 21 CFR Part 11 compliance. You may have specific business rules based on the way you construct your contracts with clients. Make sure you know what those are and make sure that the software you consider allows you to comply with them. There are, of course, many other security considerations, so I will simply, for now, repeat my invitation to include your IT and security people early and often. Okay, next question for you. Simple question. Let me get back to my ability to launch these polls. Where did it go? Polls. There we go. Launch it. Sorry. Where are you coming from? What are you using now to manage your data? Please again go to the Zoom poll function here. We'd love to learn kind of your start point. What is your baseline for beginning this exploration process with us? Okay, now that you have the lingo, categories of functionality, the benefits of a LIMS, it's actually time to evaluate some products and vendors. Here's where things start to get a little more fun, I think. The starting points for an initial evaluation and shortlisting of candidates tend to come from an exploration of vendor websites and collateral, perusal of product tours and trials, and requests for generalized demonstrations of software. These are important to filter out the large number of options that almost certainly will not work for you. It is not, however, sufficient for a final decision. For that, you will eventually get into real conversations with experts on the vendor staff, tailored demonstrations and trials with your data, and possibly full-on pilot projects when additional depth is still required. Let me add really quick that there are sometimes institutional requirements to compose RFPs as part of the evaluation. That's requests for proposals. This is where you send your requirements to a variety of vendors that pass your initial evaluation and request that they describe how their software will serve you or not. This is extremely common, but I will caution you that this can be a very difficult and time-consuming process for all parties involved. And I have seen many of these ultimately not actually enable a final decision to be made. But again, sometimes it is something that you have to do. I will also call your attention to the conspicuous lack of a pricing assessment in these early stages. This is because most LIMS vendors will not publish their pricing. This can be very frustrating, but do not be afraid to ask directly for pricing. Simply be ready to answer a lot of the questions that I have prepared you for earlier in order to get an answer. And now it's time for a deeper dive. You want to directly try these products with real world data. I'm going to start off with a side note here before we dive into tips for trialing software. By this point in the process, it is really important that you are prepared to disseminate a decision to all those who will be affected. Hopefully, key change agents within your organization, within your teams, are already involved, perhaps even part of the exploration and decision making, but make sure that expectations for them and their teams are set carefully. And then when the time comes, they are preparing to implement. Okay, with that, here's some recommendations for in-depth trialing of software. I cannot emphasize this enough. Using your real data is one of the best ways to make sure that what you want and expect to get out of it will actually be there. How do you actually get through your processes in the software? Like actually set that up, walk through it, see what it looks and feels like. It can also help you understand how intuitive and useful the product is, which can in turn impact adoption difficulty. Flexibility, customization, scalability, extensibility. I don't have to remind you that with scientific variation comes unique needs. Can the product accommodate your special flavor? And can it accommodate changes over time and new processes as they inevitably arise? Then also explore how well the software plays with other systems and instruments. A vendor may not show you every single vertex between their software and your systems, but make sure you see enough to trust that the rest can be covered. I'll also note here that you're going to see different ways in which vendors manage this kind of stuff. Some vendors will charge money per integration or per instrument. Just be ready for that kind of conversation. Okay, review how data is managed. Obviously, that's actually a really broad point, but managed and secured. How access controlled it is, whether it fits your scenarios, etc. And then big plug here, it's not just you who should go through all of this in-depth exploration. You should have the critical users representing the various teams that you want to serve doing the same. So tell those users what you want to know from them, what you want them to do and try. Actively seek that feedback. And then don't hesitate to ask the vendor for what you need, whether that be guidance, more time, Q&A sessions, or something else. Okay. The reality is that there's probably more than one product out there that's going to work for you. Each one will be, some imperfect match for your requirements and will present trade-offs for you to consider. And obviously, if the needed functionality is not there, you're not going to choose the product. Fine. But if it is there, I strongly encourage you to consider the vendor themselves in your evaluation. You are effectively considering a long-term relationship, maybe 5, 10, 15 years more with them. This can be a true differentiator. So let's start with vendor and product viability. How long have they been in business? What's their reputation like? Mind you, it shouldn't necessarily be a deal breaker if a company is very new. They may very well have the best product and service, okay? Are there regular updates and improvements to the product? Or is the product kind of on the shelf in a maintenance mode with the company simply trying to maximize profit from work they completed 10 years ago? And will the vendor share some of their plans for the roadmap? Are they improving and building in ways that are valuable to you? Or are they kind of moving away from your use case? Can you imagine making this commitment, getting implemented, and then having the vendor go out of business or decide to mothball the product that you bought? This is unlikely if their responses to the previous questions are positive. What does partnership and vendor support look like? Does the vendor have a demonstrated track record of successful partnerships? Or does everyone run away screaming after a short time, after a year or two? You can sometimes gauge from their websites, but I'd recommend requesting referrals. Is the support and cultural style a match for your organization? Think of the difference between, like a large faceless company that makes it difficult to contact them unless you say offer them more money, and a smaller one that's seeking to build a long-term institutional relationship with you who cares about your outcomes. Has a very different feel to it. What is the vendor's approach to troubleshooting and issue resolution related to the last point? Do you file requests with an apparent black hole and then kind of hope that you hear something constructive, or do you have a responsive and dedicated contact who clearly makes competent efforts to help you? And then what is the pricing structure, and are there additional costs? What's the pricing model, including things like subscription fees, one-time costs, ongoing maintenance costs, and how stable is the pricing? This is kind of a big one. How much of an increase should you expect in the future around cost? Most companies have some kind of annual inflation-based price increases. You should just kind of expect that. Sometimes, however, companies will increase their prices 20, 30, 40% at a time. This can indicate that their product is dramatically underpriced for the market, but much more often it indicates that the company's in some kind of distress, and you should consider what that means. You, of course, are the only ones that truly know your budget now and in the future, and make sure the things that you want are compatible with your financial and legal situation. Does the vendor clearly show technical and scientific competence? This is, of course, relevant because you are scientists seeking a technical solution to a data and information problem. A lack of competence is likely to show up in a deep product demo, but there are other good ways to assess this. So you can ask vendors to describe implementation successes, timelines, necessary resources required for success, and you can ascertain whether the vendors comport with best practices for software services, things like disaster recovery plans, system failure responses, data breaches, stuff like that. And then big one, how do they treat you? Pro tip here: if the sales process has been valuable, you like the way you're treated, you like the people, it's a good cultural fit so far, that probably reasonably represents what the ongoing relationship and support will look like. Conversely, if it makes your day worse to interact with the sales or partnership representatives, or they hound you to make a decision faster than you're comfortable, that might be a bad sign for the long-term relationship. Okay, before we go to the decision-making, let me share some poll results, since you also all might be interested in this. I hope that's sharing right. It looks like what challenges people are having. The most of them, the highest percentage, seem to be inefficiencies and the effects of spreadsheets. But there are quite a few of you that are struggling with legacy or home-built systems, as well as growth and scaling. So it looks like there's actually quite a variety of here. Very good. And then we got one more poll. Let's see where everyone's kind of coming from. Also have a pretty good variety here. Most people have something, and it's kind of a good spread. Spreadsheets, some systems, other LIMS, and generalized tools. Okay, so actually quite a spread here. Thanks very much for that. Okay, making the decision. We have arrived. My goal is for nothing on this slide to surprise you at this point. It's just an application of the implied success criteria from each of the previous slides. So this is simple, maybe compared to some of the other things. Gather the people involved in the final decision. Review what you have learned, including requirements, requirement comparisons, trial feedback, user acceptance, total cost, vendor support and culture, scalability and future-proofing, alignment with product direction, and let us never forget the lawyers, the contractual terms themselves. Don't forget to understand those clearly and their implications. And then follow your planned process, including the inevitable disagreement between decision makers and how you plan to resolve that. And then tell your people, embrace the change. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate your interest and attention. If you're out there planning or looking for a data management solution, whether you're at the very beginning of the process or the end, we'd be delighted to meet with you and discuss it, whether or not we're a perfect fit for you. And now I'd like to address any questions that you have out there. Please add yours in the Q&A if there are any that you haven't added already. Okay, we got one question already. Thanks so much. Should we expect the vendor to help with this process and change management after a selection is made? I hope so. Yeah. So a lot of vendors will, and there are some that won't as much. And so it's certainly the case that when you're looking at that vendor experience, that support experience, that part of what you investigate with them is how they go about doing that, how they go about helping you prepare as well as helping you implement. So, the good ones are going to offer dedicated people that, that have some expertise in the area in which you operate. And they're going to be able to ask you some questions, help you look at example data, hear about your processes in your terms, and help translate them into, the way that the LIMS ought to be configured to best serve you. They'll help you model it, seek your feedback, and iterate with you until it looks and works the way that you should expect. Okay, one more here so far. Most common pitfall you've seen when folks are evaluating a LIMS? Yeah. There are a lot. What's the most common one? Probably a lot of good options here, actually. I might say that it has to do with, the clarity around requirements and their priority, because in effect, as I kind of said early in the presentation, that really dictates your selection criteria, your success criteria. As in, to take this a little bit deeper, sometimes people will say that they want, a couple of things, and as they go through the process, those most important things appear to the vendor to kind of be shifting or changing, and that usually arises from a lack of clarity on the side of the person doing the evaluating. Obviously, as you go through this process, you're going to learn more about what's really important to you, and of course, it's okay to say, "Here's what I learned. Therefore, this is really important." But really, the ability to make priorities, the forced choice exercises, is really kind of important. Okay, here's another one. How do you tell how much configuration or customization a system will require? Yes. Okay. There are a variety of ways. The two best ones are to ask, and to do a deep dive yourself, to be hands-on with this stuff. If what you want is, very ordinary and a perfect match for the way the system is by default configured, probably very little customization is required. The reason why I brought up customization and extensibility, flexibility, adaptability is because things change over time. There are key differences typically between the way that one organization does something and the way another organization does the same thing. In its most basic form, the exact types of data and the shape that they're in definitely vary between them. So, it's important to be able to accommodate capturing data slightly differently between one type or another. Very often, the best LIMS are going to make it really easy for your administrators to know how to make those small changes. The best LIMS are going to be the ones that do not require you to go back to the vendor's software engineering team and have them, change a bunch of code and customize things for you, especially at high cost. However, sometimes people want really unique things. And if you want something really unique, it's very unlikely that there is a software vendor out there that has in advance prepared the way for that unique thing. And so, you might already know what those unique things are and be prepared to talk about them. And just make sure that you have your processes and scenarios outlined clearly so that when you present them to the vendor, they can say, oh, we can do 9 out of 10 of these, but this one's kind of interesting. Let's talk about it. That'll be a good indication that some of that customizability is kind of required. Okay. Awesome. Lots of questions. I appreciate it. Should I pick a vendor who's in the same country as me? Not necessarily. There are some potential advantages to that, but a vendor halfway across the world, if they want to sell to you, if they want to support you, or they're gonna have the infrastructure in place to do so, regardless of time zone differences. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Part of the reason why I brought up the location of the data infrastructure itself when it's cloud-based is because there are, for example, AWS environments that are on the west coast of the United States, the east coast of the United States, in various parts of Europe and Asia, kind of all over the place. And those locations can affect responsiveness, performance of various things, and your institution may have requirements around exactly where those things are located. To most users of the system, it doesn't matter at all. If you care, it's worth talking about. If you don't care, no, I wouldn't worry about it. Let's see. What are, in your experience, the key points to evaluate in terms of UI UX? Ooh, yes. Given as you highlighted in your first slide, efficiency is one of the main problems that a LIMS should address. Yes. So ease of use, ease of adoption, ease of adaptability. Key points to evaluate. Okay, so this is where I really emphasize trying to perform your process in the system as part of this hands-on, which is, there may be some basic configuration required, and during a trial or demo period, it's perfectly fine for you to describe it and have the vendor kind of configure it for you so that you can step into it, try it, see what it looks like with your data and get a feel for it. It's gonna actually be pretty obvious how, what the experience is like. Do you spend several minutes looking for the right button? Do you, when you think you found it, does it take you to strange places? How difficult is it to get the view of the information you're looking for that you want? How difficult is it to import things? These are all experiences that you'll feel them pretty quickly when you actually try the thing. That's why I emphasize so heavily getting hands-on with this stuff, is because the way that the vendor describes what they do may be a perfect match for the way you describe what you do. That doesn't mean that within the application itself, it's exactly the way you'd expect it. You'll feel that pretty quickly when you get hands-on. What process does LabKey offer for proof of concepts? Okay, so this is like pilot projects, experimenting. how could we demonstrate feel comfortable that a preferred vendor is one that can demonstrate value and user acceptance? Yes. Okay. So I mentioned potentially doing pilot projects. So that's actually a step beyond kind of doing a deep dive hands-on demo. This is where you say, okay, it seems like what you offer is going to serve us, but you're also asking for a lot of money and a lot of time and a long-term commitment. What are ways that we can de-risk this? Is there a 3-month, 6-month, proof of concept pilot program where you can actually start helping us implement certain key aspects of this, and we can actually try it? That doesn't require a full year or multi-year commitment and that much money. Yes, I recommend these if you still feel greatly uncertain, and for organizations that are coming from relatively inexpensive systems like spreadsheets. There actually can be some not just sticker shock with these systems, but shock at how much work is required to get organized and be prepared to transition into one of them. This kind of goes partway back to the change management question that I answered earlier. Many organizations will offer such programs. They come in a variety of names. At LabQ, we call it a solution design engagement. Lots of other groups will do this kind of thing. You just kind of need to ask about it when you're feeling uncertain. Okay. Do you see LIMS and ELNs continue to, let's see, can you cover it? Oh, let's see. I think the question here is about the overlap between LIMS and ELNs, their convergence, or whether we'll still see products in both segments. Yeah, okay, really good question. If you spend a lot of time reading various vendors and think tanks, I don't want to call them think tanks, groups that talk about market trends and needs, you'll see a lot of articles about distinguishing between ELNs and LIMS, and you'll see a lot about how much they can overlap. And so, yeah, the fundamental question is the industry, is the market headed towards a convergence of those, or keeping them separate? And I think the answer is convergence. I think that that has already begun in a significant way. And it's interesting to watch the different approaches. Some organizations will come at it from a where the user experience is primarily like that of previous notebooking applications, and some will come at it from an experience that is primarily from the data management, data capture and analysis side. So it's a little bit more data oriented versus narrative oriented, but both of them behind the scenes can cover most of or all of what the other one has previously offered. I think that convergence, that integration of functions is really useful and really powerful, at very least in terms of really consolidating down to a single system, as well as the ability to have your data in a structured way, which as I've said, is important for a variety of automated as well as data modeling or like machine learning modeling, post hoc and aggregate use kind of functions, which historically has been extremely difficult in a notebook because that's just free text. But merging that with the ability of those ELNs and notebook functionalities to combine that narrative information with the structured data to annotate, highlight things that are important, and make it easy for the scientists to write down what happened and why. So hopefully that answers that. And we're coming up on the hour. Are there any other last minute questions? I'm really grateful that everyone engaged the way that they did. And again, we'd love to talk to you more if you're interested. Looks like maybe that's all the questions. So I'll just thank you one more time for your interest and attention. Thanks for joining us at LabKey, and look forward to hearing from you again soon.